Adams composed Become Ocean as a silent testament to our changing environment. Within this orchestral composition, he establishes a soundscape in which water levels rise indefinitely until all Earth literally becomes ocean, drawing parallels between this modern work and the environmental struggles going on today. Sea levels continue to rise each year, and as warming of the biosphere continues, our future rates will exceedingly increase if no changes are made. Water will not only expand in higher climates, but the melting of the polar ice caps will also add more volume to the ocean, causing sea levels to rise. The global phenomenon of rising temperature and sea levels affects all life on Earth, but it seems to go unnoticed in everyday life because we are so often separated from the resources we use in a post-industrialized society. Yet 2/3 of Earth's population lives within 37 miles of an ocean, with 70% of the whole Earth covered by water. There will surely be serious consequences to any change in water levels, so the importance we place on the waters we survive on should never be underestimated. Become Ocean quietly presents this important issue of climate change by turning music into representation of landscape, bringing us hauntingly close to the very thing that could ruin us all. Will John Adams' work arouse the inspiration needed to bring about environmental change?
I'm obsessed with place as music and music as place. And what I want to experience as a listener, and what I hope for you as a listener, is to discover a strange and beautiful and maybe somewhat frightening new place, and invite you in to that place to find your own way, have your own experience. If we're listening deeply, if we're listening carefully, if we're listening with our broadest awareness, both noise and silence lead us to the same understanding, which is the whole world is music.
Upon listening to Become Ocean, it is clear that Adams evokes the vastness of the ocean and a sense of stop time, eternity under the waves. Adams's 40 years of experience in politics and music have certainly been an ongoing force in his compositions. Even as a young college student, Adams' heart was drawn to the environment. He took a position at the Northern Alaska Environmental Center upon graduation. It was there that Adams decided to combine his love of music and his passion for the environment. The first piece that marks Adams's interest with music and landscape was his composition Earth and the Great Weather, which paved the way for Become Ocean 20 years later. John Luther Adams's interest in environmental conservation shaped his own worldview for music and composition. Climate change has taken a toll on our Earth, whether it be our forest, farms, or our economy. The continuous abuse of carbon dumping into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels has decimated ocean ecosystems all over the world. The death of coral reefs, especially the Great Barrier Reef, should not be taken lightly either. Become Ocean not only evokes a sense of fear, but also a necessity of respect for the ocean as we acknowledge its power to overcome everything. Even though we aren't ocean dwellers, we still rely heavily on it for our survival, and are inevitably tied to the course it decides to take. We are at a race against time, nature, and our own destructive tendencies. Works such as Become Ocean by John Luther Adams are works of passion stemming from the composer's love of the environment and determination to represent his music through landscape in an experimental way. He also has expressed he wanted to create a piece that helps the listener become hopelessly lost in the landscape of the ocean. The piece starts to mimic the blows of a steamboat and slowly morphs into the swelling and crashing of the ocean waves through the use of dynamics, dissonance, and carefully planned resolutions. There are several moments when the melody is suddenly phased into the forefront and has a moment of spotlight within the thick texture. Just as quickly as the melody appears, it fades into ambience with another melodic idea. Listeners can close their eyes and imagine themselves drifting through the waves of the ocean. There are many times when musical waves are louder than others, but this is all due to the numeric relationships that govern the piece.
We're all inevitably products of culture, of our cultures, whatever that may be these days, and of human culture. But an equally ridiculous idea is that somehow human culture stands apart from nature. That's an absurd proposition that's gotten us into some very, very serious, potentially terminal trouble as a species. But there are these moments when all three of the layers come together in these huge tsunamis of sound. And that happens 3 times in the piece.
The numerical relationships within Become Ocean add a sort of natural quality to the piece that helps us identify within the waves of life. Sometimes things are quiet, and sometimes everything happens to line up at the same time and we are busy and chaotic. Adams portrays the ocean as a natural phenomenon of power that we can somehow identify with on a fundamental level. With this connection comes an obligatory respect for the force of nature that is not only similar to, but also more powerful than, all of human life. Out of this work, a primordial relationship is realized, and we can determine who we really are and where we come from and what our role is in protecting the ocean.
All life on this earth emerged from the ocean, and if we don't wake up and pay attention here pretty soon, we human animals may find ourselves once again becoming ocean sooner than we imagine.
The piece evokes a oneness with the ocean, but with that oneness must come respect. The government has a more powerful influence than science does on implementing action to save the ocean. It plays a key role in how society handles climate change. Regardless of how many people choose to go green, the shocking truth is that the government's use of legislation and money is the driving factor in the improvement of our environment. This doesn't mean that the goodwill of some people won't help, but major corporations, as a result, won't be as committed to change. This is where the legislation of the government is useful. Luckily, there is still hope. Recently, a deal has been struck to propel and improve the fight against global warming. The Paris Agreement in 2018 was signed by multiple countries and world leaders in order to reduce environmental impact by passing regulations on businesses within the borders of the participating countries. Unfortunately, the United States chose not to enter this agreement. This was met with a social outpour of anger, as the United States is one of the biggest contributors to pollution problems. Due to the social uproar, the people of the United States have become more aware and educated about climate change, with over 50% of people stating that they know that global warming is caused by human activity. The people's power has yet to come to fruition due to the Trump administration's denial of the issue, stating that it's a hoax to justify defunding environmental protection agencies. This raises one of the most important questions for humankind. How long do we have before our planet and all of the resources we use are unavailable? With time running out, we can only hope action can still be taken before we find out the truth. Adams's Become Ocean evokes an awareness within the looming problem, but his intentions may be different than we think. In an interview with Aaron Rath from National Public Radio, John Luther Adams says, "A listener can read my 2-sentence program note evoking the rising seas and melting ice, and they can ponder that if they choose to, or they can just take the music. They don't even have to know the title." Many critics claim that Adams had political motives for his composition, but Adams himself takes a more neutral stance, allowing whatever interpretation the audience chooses. Clearly, his motives are not overtly political, but there is certainly an underlying environmentalist aspect of his composition, despite Adams's neutral stance. However, Adams is certainly a musician of passion. Music is his way of interpreting the world. Even though Adams states that Become Ocean wasn't created as an environmentalist work, it has been perceived as such. Adams, as an artist, chooses to leave the interpretation up to the audience. In an interview with Karina da Fonseca Woolham from the New York Times, John Luther Adams states, "I am highly suspicious of political art. I'm not a propagandist. I'm not trying in my music to teach a lesson or tell a story." Adams himself wants to make it abundantly clear that it is up to the listener to make their own connections, emphasizing that his work is not a political propaganda. Even so, John Adams was largely influenced by environmentalism, as he spent his early career as an environmental political activist in Alaska before composing full-time. Become Ocean has provided a new soundscape for listeners to experience an overwhelming sense of beauty and terror simultaneously, becoming a public statement on the awareness of rising sea levels. The Seattle Symphony Orchestra premiered Become Ocean on June 20th, 2013, in Seattle at the Benaroya Hall. The first performance of John Luther Adams could attend was the New York premiere on May 6, 2014 at Carnegie Hall, directed by Ludovic Merlot with the Seattle Symphony in Carnegie Hall. Subsequent performances have occurred in Winnipeg, Los Angeles, Miami, and Leipzig. The initial review was not favorable. Melinda Bargreen from the Seattle Times writes, "It was a pleasant soundscape, one that deployed the full orchestral palette of colors. But after the first 20 minutes or so, the musical ideas had pretty much run their course, and there were no further developments to justify sustaining the piece. Some listeners in the balcony areas made a discreet but early retreat. At least the music fell gratefully on the ear, delivering consonance rather than dissonance, and in its length, Become Ocean evoked a sense of vast oceanic scale." Alex Ross reviewed the work more favorably and compared it to The Rite of Spring, because it shocked audiences almost as much as Igor Stravinsky did 100 years earlier. Like the sea at dawn, it presents a gorgeous surface, yet its heaving motion conveys overwhelming force. Whether orchestras will be playing it a century hence is impossible to say, but I went away reeling. Become Ocean won a Pulitzer Prize in 2014 and a Grammy in 2015. Its time in the limelight has led to increased popularity of the piece. This allowed not only music lovers, but also musicians and celebrities to jump onto the bandwagon of climate change. Apparently, the piece has even managed to get the attention of pop artists like Taylor Swift. In fact, listening to it convinced her to donate $50,000 to the Seattle Symphony Orchestra. John Luther Adams and Taylor Swift seem to be unlikely acquaintances, but they are both Grammy Award winners. She wrote a letter to the Seattle Symphony Orchestra director, Ludovic Merlot, in which she praised the recording of John Adams' large-scale, hypnotically aware piece. Swift's donation to the orchestra will be used to support an educational program called Link Up Seattle Symphony that works with elementary school music students to support the orchestral musicians' pension fund. Has Become Ocean really changed the way people will react to global environmental issues? Worrying about public reaction might be missing what Adams is trying to get across as a composer, but he has certainly influenced others to consider the distant possibility of an ocean rising apocalypse. Become Ocean has instilled a modern sense of intimacy between ourselves and our environment, one which pervades all social and political boundaries. There is something much more important than a political message to be learned from this work, but John Luther Adams invites us all to bridge that gap between humankind and the world it utilizes. There is something almost comforting about returning to the ocean from where we once came. Will we become ocean?